Picture this. You're standing in a neonatal intensive care unit.
Oh, man.
Yeah, the situation it's incredibly tense. A medical team is gathered around a newborn boy, just 1 day old.
Right, the very first day.
Exactly. And the baby is struggling to breathe. I mean, he's showing severe respiratory distress. His abdomen is visibly distended, it's just swelling outward, and his urinary output is dangerously poor.
Which is an immediate, massive red flag.
Right. And if you look back at the prenatal records, an ultrasound taken at 32 weeks already showed some, well, terrifying warning signs.
Yeah, usually you'd see the structural issues way before birth.
Exactly. The fetus had bilateral hydronephrosis, which basically means both kidneys were massively swollen with fluid. The tubes leading from the kidneys were also ballooned outward.
That's a hydrator.
Right, hydrator. Plus the bladder was immensely distended. And crucially, the mother had oligohydramnios.
Dangerously low levels of amniotic fluid. It's the kind of clinical picture that sets off alarm bells the moment you see that chart. Because, every single one of those symptoms, the swollen kidneys, the balloon tubes, the lack of fluid.
They're all connected.
Right. They're all separate dominoes that have already fallen. But to figure out what pushed that very first domino, you can't just look at the newborn as he is today.
Right, we have to rewind the clock. And that is our mission for this deep dive. To solve the mystery of what's happening to this 1-day-old baby boy, we are going back to the very first weeks of life inside the womb.
It's quite the journey.
It really is. We need to explore the astonishing multi-stage construction project that is the human urinary system.
Yeah.
Because as it turns out, the way your body built its internal plumbing is, well, it's one of the most bizarre, overcomplicated, and perilous processes in human biology.
Oh, absolutely. Embryology at its core is just this incredible story of trial, error, and impossibly precise timing.
Trial and error being the key words there.
Totally. Everything we're going to talk about starts around the 4th week of intra-uterine life. At this point, you aren't much more than a tiny cluster of developing tissues.
Barely even recognizable, right?
Right. But a specific layer of tissue, called the intermediate mesoderm, begins its work. And what it does first is almost counterintuitive.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is the part that completely blew my mind in our research.
It's wild, isn't it?
It really is. Because when you think of an organ developing, you assume it just grows from a tiny seed into a bigger version of itself, like a tiny heart grows into a big heart.
That would make sense.
But that is not what happens here. Your body actually builds not 1, not 2, but 3 completely different kidney systems before it finally settles on the permanent version.
It's true.
It's like a software developer writing 2 entire throwaway versions of a program just to build the scaffolding for the final app.
That is a perfect analogy. Nature is essentially drafting. Let's look at draft number 1. Medically, it's called pronephers.
Pronephorous, got it.
This appears early in that 4th week, but it doesn't appear anywhere near where your kidneys are now. It actually shows up in the cervical and thoracic region.
Wait.
Essentially your neck and upper chest area.
Which is a terrifying place to grow a kidney.
It would be if it stuck around, but it's incredibly rudimentary. It consists of just 7 to 10 solid groups of cells.
So they aren't even really doing anything yet.
Right. They haven't even hollowed out to form tubes. It's completely non-functional and it's entirely transient. It completely degenerates and disappears within a single week.
Wow.
Yeah, it's nothing more than a biological placeholder.
So the first draft completely vanishes. Does the body just sit there without a kidney? Or does it, immediately try again?
Oh, it immediately gets to work on a second attempt.
Yeah.
As that first draft vanishes, draft number 2, the mesonephros appears.
Okay, where is this one?
Slightly lower down. In the thoracic and upper lumbar regions, basically the chest and lower back. Now, this draft is a major upgrade.
A functional upgrade.
Exactly. It actually hollows out and forms primitive nephrons, which are, the basic filtration units of a kidney.
Okay.
They even have a key filtering structure called a Bowman's capsule, and they drain into these long tubes on either side of the embryo called mesonephric ducts.
So draft 2 actually works, like it actively filters fluids.
It does function for a short time, but just like the first draft, it is doomed.
Naturally.
Yeah. By the second month, so around the 4th to 6th week, This entire temporary kidney starts degenerating from the head down to the tail.
So we just throw it all in the trash again?
Well, not quite. Nature doesn't completely waste the materials.
Ah, right. The actual kidney part dies off, but the plumbing, those ducts you mentioned, gets hijacked for something completely different, right?
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how that tissue is repurposed depending on your biological sex.
Okay, how so?
Well, in females, those temporary mesonephric ducts generally degenerate and disappear entirely.
Okay, so they're gone.
Right. But in males, that leftover embryonic kidney duct survives and gets entirely repurposed to become the vas deferens.
Wait, the reproductive tract.
Yep. It becomes a crucial part of the male reproductive tract that carries sperm.
That is wild. The duct that was meant to carry early fetal urine ends up being the exact same tube that allows for human reproduction later in life.
It's an incredible display of biological efficiency, really.
Yeah, but the embryo still needs a permanent kidney, right? Like we still haven't built the actual kidney.
Which brings us to draft number 3, the permanent kidney, known as the metanephros.
Okay, third time's the charm.
Exactly. This one finally shows up around the 5th week, but building this final version isn't just about a mass of cells passively growing larger.
It's more complicated than that.
Much more. It requires a perilous, perfectly timed collision between two completely separate tissues, the grand handshake, so to speak.
The grand handshake, I love that.
Yeah. Because to have a functional kidney, you need two distinct components. You need the plumbing to collect the urine and the filters to actually create it.
Right.
And these two systems develop independently and have to physically find each other in the dark.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because from our research, the plumbing actually sprouts out of that leftover duct from draft 2, doesn't it?
That's right. The lower part of that mesonephric duct buds outward. It's called the ureteric bud.
The ureteric bud.
And this bud starts growing toward a completely different patch of tissue nearby, a cluster of cells called the metanephric blastema.
So the ureteric bud is basically on a mission to form the entire collecting component of the urinary tract.
Exactly. As it grows toward that target tissue, it divides over and over, up to 12 times. It branches out like a tree.
Just continuously branching.
Right. This single tiny bud eventually gives rise to the ureters, the renal pelvis, the major and minor calyces, and an astounding 1 to 3 million collecting ducts.
Millions of microscopic pipes, just from one bud.
It's staggering. Meanwhile, that tissue it's growing toward the metanephric blastema is responsible for the excretory component, the actual filters.
So it's making the water treatment plants.
Basically, yeah. It forms the nephrons. The blastema forms the Bowman's capsule, the proximal and distal convoluted tubules, and the loop of Henle.
Okay.
These tiny treatment plants form a cap around the tips of that massive branching ureteric tree.
Wait, hold on. If biological efficiency is the goal here, why on earth would nature grow the pipes and the filters from two completely different sets of tissue?
It does seem counterintuitive.
Right. Like, why not just grow them together from the start? It feels like we are begging for a massive million-part connection error. What happens if these millions of pipes miss their corresponding filters?
Well, if they fail to fuse perfectly, the consequences are severe. The physical barrier between them has to break down so fluid can flow.
And if it doesn't?
If that communication fails, the fluid filtered by the nephron has nowhere to go. It backs up immediately, and the pressure causes the microscopic tubules to balloon outward into cysts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is the underlying mechanism behind polycystic kidney disease, or PKD.
Just massive fluid-filled sacs instead of functioning kidney tissue.
Exactly.
Is that what happened to our baby in the NICU?
Sure.
Because the ultrasound showed massively swollen kidneys.
It's a great theory, because the physical swelling looks very similar on a scan, but PKD is a structural failure of the kidney tissue itself from the very beginning.
Oh, I see.
As we'll discover, our NICU baby actually built perfect kidneys. Something else destroyed them after the fact.
Okay.
But just to touch on PKD quickly, there are two main genetic variations. There's the autosomal dominant type, where cysts form from all parts of the nephron, and the disease usually doesn't cause kidney failure until adulthood.
Right, so that's the adult onset version.
Yes. But then there's the autosomal recessive type, which is incredibly severe. In this infant version, the cysts form specifically in those collecting ducts we talked about.
The ones from the ureteric bud.
Right. The kidneys become massively enlarged, leading to devastating renal failure in early childhood.
Because the grand handshake failed.
Exactly.
But let's assume the connection works. By the 10th week, the vario between the plumbing and the filters ruptures, and they are officially connected.
Right.
And by the 12th week, this tiny fetus is actively producing urine.
Which is pretty amazing on its own.
It is.
Ah.
But we have another geographical problem. These newly minted, fully functional kidneys are in the completely wrong place.
Oh, yeah. They developed all the way down on the pelvic region.
Right.
Adult kidneys sit much higher up against the posterior abdominal wall, right below the rib cage. So these vital organs have to undertake a massive migration upward through the abdomen.
And when they start this journey, they look really bizarre, don't they?
They do.
They don't have that smooth, classic kidney bean shape yet. They're lobulated, covered in deep bumps and grooves, kind of like a blackberry.
Yeah, that lobulated appearance is totally normal for a fetus and actually persists at birth.
Wait, really? Even at birth?
Yep. It only smooths out during infancy. And the mechanism there is interesting. They smooth out because the existing nephrons physically grow larger and stretch the tissue out.
Oh, so it's not because the body is making new nephrons to fill in the gaps.
Exactly. You are born with all the nephrons you will ever have.
Good to know. So these bumpy, blackberry-looking kidneys are sitting down in the pelvis, and they have to climb up the abdominal wall.
Right.
It reminds me of an elevator climbing the outside of a skyscraper.
That's a great way to visualize it.
But an organ needs a constant blood supply to live, right? It can't just detach its blood vessels, make the climb, and reattach at the top.
No, it definitely can't do that.
So as this kidney elevator climbs, it's constantly grabbing new blood vessels, like plugging into new power outlets from higher up on the aorta.
Exactly.
And as it plugs into a new artery above, the old lower artery detaches and dies off. But what if the elevator gets stuck or the cord doesn't unplug?
Well, that unplugging failure is actually quite common.
Really?
Yeah. If those old lower embryonic arteries from the pelvis fail to degenerate as the kidney ascends, you end up with what we call accessory renal arteries.
So you just have extra blood vessels.
Right. It's an anatomical anomaly where a kidney is drawing blood from multiple different sources along the aorta simply because the old vessels never withered away.
Just trailing its old extension cords behind it.
Exactly. But there is a much more dramatic anomaly that can happen during this ascent.
Okay, I'm braced.
Sometimes, while still down in the pelvis, the two inferior poles, the bottom edges of the left and right kidneys, accidentally fuse together.
Oh, no.
Yeah. They form one giant U-shaped organ called a horseshoe kidney.
And this giant fused kidney still tries to make the climb up the skyscraper.
It tries, but there is a major anatomical obstacle in the way.
What's that?
The inferior mesenteric artery. It branches directly off the front of the aorta to feed the gut.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. As the horseshoe kidney ascends, that fused bottom section gets clotheslined right under that artery.
Ouch.
It physically gets trapped and cannot complete its journey upward. It leaves the kidney permanently stranded in the lower abdomen.
Just stuck forever halfway up the wall.
Basically, yes.
Okay, so we've built the kidneys, we've connected the microscopic plumbing, and we've successfully moved them up the abdomen. But wait.
Yeah.
You said the kidneys are actively producing urine by week 12.
Right.
This fetus is still inside the mother for another 6 months? Where is all this urine going? It can't just be floating aimlessly inside the fetal body.
No, it can't. The fetus excretes the urine into the amniotic fluid.
Okay.
But to do that safely, we need to build a storage and disposal system. We need the lower urinary tract.
Right.
And this involves some of the most complex cellular origami of the entire process. Between the 4th and 7th week, the lower end of the embryo's digestive tube forms a structure called the cloaca.
Which is Latin for sewer, right?
It is. Essentially, the urinary, reproductive, and digestive tracts all dump into one common chamber.
Like a bird.
Exactly. Many animals, like birds, keep this set up for life, but humans need to divide it.
So how does it separate?
A thick partition of tissue called the urorectal septum grows downward. It physically drops like a blast door to split the cloaca into two completely separate systems.
Okay, what are the two systems?
You get the anal canal in the back and the urogenital sinus in the front.
Wow. So one tube pinches and folds into entirely different anatomical systems.
Right.
So this new urogenital sinus in the front, how does that map out to become the bladder and the urethra?
The urogenital sinus develops into three distinct parts. The upper largest part balloons out to form the urinary bladder itself.
Makes sense.
Below that is the pelvic part, and then the lowest section is the phallic part. These lower two sections will form the urethra, the tube that carries urine out of the body.
And this is where things differ between males and females, yeah.
Exactly. This is where biological sex creates a major divergence. In females, that pelvic part forms the entire relatively short urethra.
Okay.
But in males, the pelvic and phallic parts combine to form a much longer, multi-segmented urethra extending through the prostate and the penis.
Fascinating. And there's a strange leftover structure attached to the very top of the bladder during all this, isn't there? I remember reading about the allantois.
Ah, yes. The allantois.
What exactly is that?
Initially, the apex of the developing bladder is connected to this tube, the allantois, which extends all the way up into the umbilical cord.
Into the umbilical cord.
Yeah, but as development continues, this tube is supposed to completely obliterate. It closes up and shrivels into a thick, fibrous cord. In adults, we call this the median umbilical ligament, or the urechus.
But if that tube fails to close up,
Then you have a problem.
you basically have a pipe running from your bladder directly to your belly button.
That's exactly what it is. If the urechus remains completely open, you get a urachal fistula, where urine can actually leak out from the umbilicus.
Oh, wow.
Or if it only partially closes, you can get a urachal cyst or a sinus hidden deep in the abdominal wall. It's a stark reminder of how we are stitched together.
Absolutely. And we can't forget our old friend from Draft 2, right? The mesonephric ducts.
Right. They make one final appearance here in the bladder, don't they?
They do. As the bladder grows and stretches, it physically pulls in and absorbs the very ends of those old mesonephric ducts right into its own back wall.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and this incorporated tissue forms a distinct, smooth, triangular area inside the bladder called the trigone.
So it's literal repurposed tissue from a temporary kidney draft now forming the anchor point of your bladder.
Exactly. So a failure in these final folding and dropping stages must be catastrophic for the fetus.
Very much so. If the lower abdominal wall and the front wall of the bladder fail to close properly during this complex folding, it results in exstrophy of the bladder.
Meaning the bladder is exposed.
Yes. The inside of the bladder is physically exposed to the outside of the body.
That's terrifying.
And in even more severe cases, exstrophy of the cloaca occurs, where that initial splitting process, that blast door dropping, failed entirely.
Leaving everything connected.
Right, leaving the urinary and intestinal tracts open and completely unseparated.
Which brings us full circle. We have now meticulously built the entire urinary system from scratch.
We have.
So it's time to return to the clinical mystery from the top of the deep dive. We have our one-day-old newborn boy in the NICU.
Right.
He has poor urinary output, massive abdominal distension, and severe respiratory distress. And the prenatal ultrasound showed bilateral hydronephrosis, swollen kidneys,
kidneys, yeah.
hydrutor, swollen tubes, a distended bladder, and oligohydramnios, low amniotic fluid. Based on everything we just learned about this microscopic assembly line, what went wrong?
Well, the clinical diagnosis for this baby is a condition called a posterior urethral valve, or PUV.
A valve, like a physical piece of tissue blocking the plumbing.
Precisely. Remember the urogenital sinus and the absorption of those mesonephric ducts to form the trigone?
Yeah, the repurposed tissue.
Well, PUV arises due to an abnormal development in that exact area. The most widely accepted mechanism is that there is an incomplete or faulty absorption of those ducts.
Oh, I see.
This microscopic error leaves behind persistent abnormal mucosal folds in the posterior urethra.
So it's literally an extra flap of tissue just hanging out in the exit pipe.
Right.
Like a one-way valve in a cheap pool toy.
That is an excellent way to picture it. These tiny folds of leftover tissue act as a one-way physical obstruction.
Okay, so fluid goes in but can't come out.
Fluid might be able to pass one way, but when the bladder squeezes to empty, the fluid catches the flap, snaps it shut, and blocks the urine from exiting the body.
So what does this all mean for the baby's body? Let's trace the dominoes. The mucosal fold blocks the urethra.
Right.
The baby is producing urine constantly, but it can't get out.
Mm-hmm.
So domino 1, the bladder fills up and simply cannot empty.
It just keeps filling.
It stretches and stretches under the immense volume, causing the massive distended bladder seen on the ultrasound.
And the kidneys don't care that the exit is blocked.
They just keep working.
They keep filtering blood and making more urine.
Yeah.
So the pressure inside that stretched bladder builds to extreme levels.
Which leads to domino 2.
Yes. That backup pressure overcomes the normal one-way flow, forcing the urine backward the wrong way, up the ureters. This is called vesicoureteral reflex, or VUR.
And because those delicate ureters aren't built to hold high-pressure backflow, they balloon outward. Domino 3, hydroureter.
Right. The fluid keeps backing up until it hits the kidneys themselves. The immense pressure physically compresses and crushes the delicate nephrons, the million-part filters we spent so much time building.
Domino 4, bilateral hydronephrosis.
Exactly. The pressure causes severe swelling and irreversible damage to the tissue of both kidneys.
And then there's the environment outside the baby's body. Because the baby cannot urinate into the womb, domino 5 falls.
The amniotic fluid.
Right. Fetal urine is a major component of amniotic fluid in the second half of pregnancy. No urine output means dangerously low amniotic fluid, the oligohydramnios.
Which directly leads to the final life-threatening domino.
The lungs.
Right. Amniotic fluid isn't just a cushion to protect the baby from bumps. It is actively swallowed and inhaled by the fetus.
Wait, inhale?
Yes. Expanding the lungs with that fluid is absolutely critical for normal lung tissue development. But without it, the lungs simply cannot mature properly.
That is why our one-day-old baby was in severe respiratory distress the moment he was born.
Exactly.
It is absolutely staggering. A tiny microscopic mucosal fold, a fraction of a millimeter of leftover tissue from draft 2.
Just a tiny error.
Right. It cascades into a system-wide pressure crisis that physically crushes the kidneys, balloons the bladder, and prevents the lungs from ever developing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really highlights how delicate this embryological choreography is.
It's a miracle it works at all.
It really is. Anomalies like posterior urethral valves or double ureters, where early division of the ureteric bud creates 2 separate pipes instead of 1.
Oh, wow.
Or ectopic ureters that miss the bladder entirely and connect to the vagina or urethra.
All from tiny missteps.
Right. All of these are just different variations of this intricate plumbing failing to connect at the exact right coordinate in time and space.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, take a moment to really think about the incredible, perilous journey your own body took just to build something as seemingly mundane as your urinary tract.
It's quite a story.
You survived 3 completely separate, disposable drafts of kidneys. You had organs that migrated like elevators up your abdomen, actively swapping out blood vessels on the fly. You have tissues inside your bladder right now that used to be temporary kidney ducts.
Built from the scraps of draft 2.
Exactly. So, as you go about your day, consider that your adult body is secretly an architectural museum. Hidden inside you right now are the ghosts of your embryonic past.
Ghosts in the machine.
Thickened ligaments that used to be functional ducts. Smooth patches of tissue that are the remnant of organs you actively discarded before you were even born. What other invisible remnants of your own biological history are silently shaping how you function today?